Hey, it's the boy show.
Good
Hi,
morning.
everybody.
It's the boys.
Oh man.
Welcome to the 93rd episode of The VUU. We're having a bit of technical difficulties, and so right now we're limited to just two of us and our master of technology, Robert LaVallee, and it's Hank Pierce and myself. And eventually we're going to get Keith Cron, and we're going to talk about the search process. But before then, we're going to talk about a lot of other stuff. So, Hank, what's going on out there?
I am sitting in lovely sunny, though not as warm, Medford as it was yesterday. Yesterday it got up to like 55, and people in Boston were losing their minds. People like running around in shorts and just like like people, no one knows what to do. And it's also amazing. Like, and I look out and kind of, oh, it's warm. I hear birds singing, and then I go outside and there's still 2 feet of snow out there. But it's
That's
nice.
better than 7.
Yes. Oh, yes. Exactly.
That means like you had 5 feet melt already, right?
Exactly. Something like that. Yeah. I think that's how it works. Yeah. Um, and just and what else am I doing? Oh, and just just doing church. Getting ready for all the talk about GA or all that stuff. Doing getting my
Mm,
hotel rooms, all that sort of stuff that you do when you plan for General Assembly. So that's
mm.
that's the little stuff. And you've been on a trip though.
Yes, I went down to Selma. I joined about 500 of the UUs down there in Selma. They had a conference before, Sunday was the big uh, reenactment, everybody crossing the
March, yeah.
bridge. Saturday, President Obama was there and a big concert. But the UUs were up in Birmingham on Thursday, Friday, and
Oh.
Saturday for a big conference. And I missed a bunch of it because Kentucky was closed. And
What do you mean?
well, uh,
Was it bad weather or
Interstate,
something?
yeah, Interstate 65 between. I drove down there from Ann Arbor, so Interstate 65, which goes north to south through Kentucky, was like closed, impassable. There was a 28-mile, 12-hour um, traffic jam, jackknife trucks, the whole 9 yards. So I hung out in Cincinnati waiting for my shot to go down there. So I missed the first day of the conference, which was when they honored they had James
Reed's
Reeves'
family.
family. They had Jimmy Lee Jackson's family. They had Viola Luizza's family. They honored all. There was lots and lots of participants. Uh,
I have to say, and seeing all those pictures of all the family members, like that was the thing that really just
yeah.
tugged at my heartstrings. And of course, like obviously, those families lost someone, and we as Unitarian Universalists, have some claim to be able to share them. And you also just realize though, like how many more people during the civil rights era, and today are living with missing loved ones. Um, you
Empty
know,
chairs at the table.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And to seeing like James Reeb's family and his grandchildren, you just think of all those folks who didn't grow up with a
hmm
dad or a grandfather, and just
hmm hmm Yeah, it's quite touching and poignant. You know, the day that on Sunday when we crossed over the bridge, right? It was this, the estimates was like there's 80,000 people there, and everybody's going. It was like the traffic, everybody went up we drove on the right, everybody went up over the bridge, then turned around, came back down the bridge in the other lanes, and of course, but at the bottom there, at the bottom of the bridge, there's this mass of people, and they're sorting themselves into lanes, and they're crossing each other, and so you spend about a half an hour like this close to thousands of people all jostling through this thing. And of course, we're all there with our big yellow T-shirts, and a lot of people don't know who we are, and so you're getting into these conversations with people about who you are and why you're there, and you say, well, we're here partly because we lost these people, and so you're talking to like all kinds of local African American people from all over the South, from all over the country, many of whom don't know anything about Unitarian Universalism, and are quite amazed that we lost 2 people there in that 65 events, and that we've all come back, and they're like, suddenly that gave you a chance to see it from the outside, from outside our own circle, where on the one hand it's like people are amazed by that. People are amazed by that, and people just thank you. It's like, oh well, I mean,
right.
I was 15. I don't deserve any great thanks, but they thank us for coming. And I'll tell you this. I will say this: that whole day that I was there, I just saw no organized group from any other predominantly white denomination.
No kidding.
No kidding. There's 500 UUs. I didn't see 500 Methodists go by, or Episcopalians, or anybody else.
Or the Quakers.
Right,
who had a real.
I mean, and what?
Game too.
I mean, was part of that sort of branding because we were there? You were able to identify all these UUs.
Right,
and
maybe
nobody
because
else.
other people didn't have T-shirts, but
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's lots of of people of all denominations there.
Yeah, and I certainly saw other groups wearing like similar T-shirts or having similar like identifiable outfits on in the photos that I saw. But it's funny. I've got 2 good friends who are ministers in the United Church of Christ, and I was talking to one of them about this anniversary and stuff, and he said, my friend Jeff said, I don't know anybody who went down to Selma, and I was like, really? Like, we're like, I mean, the joke is, of course, like we're tripping over them, like, or what's the real joke? That like each year more Unitarian Universalist ministerial colleagues say that they were there,
It's like thousands.
Exactly, and so you say, so I was really just. I was sort of taken aback at that, like, like, and like, because we've all seen that photo of Dr. King marching with, with rabbis and with the Grand Patriarch of the, the Greek Orthodox Church, and and Dana Greeley and all these other folks, and you kind of think, well, right, like the other folks from these other denominations were all there as well, weren't they? And maybe they were, but just not that same sense of like, come on, we're all going,
Yeah. The thing that was really impressive, though, I have to tell you this, is Saturdays at the conference, they set up the conference so Friday we were, remembering, looking back, honoring people who were there. And on Friday we were talking about looking ahead, current projects and so on. And for the first time, I will say this, for the first time, I was at a UU conference that was discussing anti-racism work that felt positive, self-confident, and already active. Not someday we should, but why haven't we yet? But already active. We heard from Krista Tives and down at St. Louis and their vigils. We heard about the James Reeb project at All Souls Church, which has gotten 500 people involved in voting rights activities. We heard from William Barber and our colleagues down in North Carolina who are very active. The Unity Church in St. Paul came down with their church that they've been partnering with, the mostly African American AME church. So they had a delegation of about 75 people, half from them and half from their local partner church, mostly African American. So we were talking with them. People had, we're talking about their Black Lives Matter banner outside their church, and in Ann Arbor, our church has given away 900 Black Lives Matter buttons, and people are wearing them all week. And and we're reporting on what that feels like. And Reverend Gale has told us that we're not supposed to take it off even when we're uncomfortable, so that we have the experience of not being able to drop out of the struggle when it gets weird, you know. So, you know, there's all this, you know, activity and positive motion and a sense of being able to do stuff, and that it just seemed enormously energizing, and really positive. You know, we heard some great speakers. William Barber spoke to us at 7:30 in the morning, and you know, that was you know, very exciting. And you know, he's up there with our colleagues from North Carolina, which, you know, work with him. And we also heard from Opal Tomate, who is like one of the women who originated the Black Lives Matter movement and the hashtag after Trayvon Martin. So I mean, it was like, you know, good stuff, and a real sense of you know, forward motion and momentum. It really felt good, and for like, you know, I didn't have any of that kind of. Sometimes you have that sense with, you know, just between you and me, Hank, and everybody else, right? There are times sometimes where you feel like, oh, we're just trying a little too hard, or we're just, you know, that whole feeling.
Yeah,
and
right.
Our self-doubt, you know, and our second-guessing ourselves all the time. And that just wasn't there. There was a real sense like we're doing this work and we're on the path, and it's exciting. So, you know, that was good. I was glad I made the drive, you know.
Well, what was your favorite?
I wish I could have gone over to hear President Obama.
Yeah.
But you know, after you get all these people and you get a hotel room and you're, you know, and a big thing, you just don't like call off your conference.
Yeah, I mean, did people stop and listen to the president, or what was the like? Were you as busy at that moment?
Some people did. Some people went over, but for the most part, the conference just charged on, you know, and did it, and we'll all catch it on YouTube, just like
it's fantastic.
Everybody's catching us.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was a fantastic speech.
That's what everybody said. That was what everybody said.
And as one colleague said, that they went, "Oh, this is the guy I voted for."
Yeah.
You know, and it was fantastic. It really was a great speech. Who else did you meet there? I mean, you know, who else? I mean, were there? Did you have friends down there, or people that you knew who weren't part of weren't UUs?
Yeah, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, who live in Minneapolis, and who are he runs a nonprofit that works on adoption, and she has done a wide variety of anti-racism consulting. They were there, but they, you know, so we were like, you know, messaging, texting, and tweeting, trying to get in touch with each other. But you know, they were in Selma on Saturday, and I was there on Sunday.
Oh, right.
But they, you know, it just means you get better mix of photos, you know, when you get home.
Right. Well, and what was their experience of it? I mean, I'm guessing you guys had a chance to sort of, you know, I mean, you guys had a chance to sort of compare notes.
Yeah, we've kind of compared some. You know, they were very, you know, activated by it too. They had a really good time and a great, you know, a great sense of solidarity with the struggle. But you know, they've been they're non-church people, so they don't have quite the same relationship as, say, you know, Sue and I. But you know, they're just part of the great mass of non-church. They probably even wouldn't call themselves spiritual, but not religious. They would just say they're not religious. And but you know, very socially progressive folks. That's Sue's side of the family, you know.
Oh, right. I understand. Right. I got you now.
Well, you know, mine isn't either. Mine's, you know, can be active too. So, you know, the thing that was amazing to me was like, because I'm posting on this, and the young woman I went to prom with in high school, who we became Facebook friends again, 50 years later, and that was my high school prom, not my kindergarten prom, but and who lives in North Carolina, supported Romney in the last election, and so on like this. Writes this very nice note saying that she just knew that I was going to be there, and that the whole thing was a great blessing, in her words. So
that's amazing too.
It's it's an amazing little thing. So, what happened in Boston during that week? Were there observations in Boston?
No, I think there was. I didn't see any going on. And part of it, is just Tom. It's just damn winter. I mean, I got to say that everyone is just beaten down. I certainly saw friends in New Hampshire at their churches, and friends. I know so the Provincetown Church did it. Had a little march and with signs and stuff. And it is well, I mean, it's a good reminder, and it's also been interesting, talking to friends who have Black Lives Matter banners. I mean, I said this last week how the Arlington Church have a banner, and until very recently the snow had covered up, so it said Black Lives and then Matters, and the snow had covered up the Matters part, so you just saw Black Lives sticking out of the snow. But that but also just hearing from friends, my friends at the First Church in Somerville, the UCC church, they've got a big Black Lives Matter, and and I said like what have you heard? And they said like just my friend Jeff said he had one person who sort of yelled out his car window, "All lives matter," and he's like and he's like, is this guy angry or not, or so. We said like if that's the only thing, no letters, no it's a I'm let me just say right now I'm reading notes from Meg and Aisha about us, and right now Aisha because who are trying to get on to our conversation here but aren't able to, and Aisha writes, Google Hangouts has decided that white men are going to talk about Selma for an hour. Well, or snow. What else? Right. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I resent that remark.
Yeah. There you go. Yes. Right.
I resemble that remark.
It is horrible.
Well, next time when they're on, we'll sit in respectful silence, listening, which will be good. I had something I was going to say. Well, it's just very interesting the juxtaposition of the Selma, the Selma remembering, and the Black Lives Matter as like the two currents that were running through that that whole conference. One very looking back and one really immersed in the present struggle. So, kind of like just. It seemed like every person kind of balanced those in their own particular way.
Some of those people, in very personal ways. So, the Church of the Larger Fellowship's own Lena Gardner, went from Selma on the weekend to an arraignment date in court in Minneapolis. Actually, is it Bloomington, where the Mall of America, She was one of the organizers of an action at the Mall of America, and they saw very clearly, the connection,
right,
about how protesters will be dealt with when you're fighting an entrenched system.
Yeah. I met her for the first time, Lena. Very.
I think it's very much alive.
Very much alive.
You were saying, Tom, it's really encouraging. We have a long way to go, but.
Well, yeah, but that's the struggle always is there. It's just sometimes we pay attention to it and sometimes we don't. So this is a good time because we are. So.
Well, there is this funny thing about sometimes the more we raise these things up, the more cause for despair there is. And maybe because we start paying attention. Like, so the fraternity brothers in Oklahoma who were, chanting that racist chant and got videotaped and outed. But it seems so, we've been having this conversation about racism without racists. Because it's so people are recognizing the institutional nature of it, or even the neurological basis of racism. And then you see stuff like that, and you're like, well, maybe there's racists too.
Well, yeah, somebody said on, I think I saw it on Facebook, somebody said, the SAE brothers will go ahead and become lawyers, doctors, judges, corporate executives, and this will be a small incident in their past. But that that just shows the kind of the institutional power of white supremacy, that small events in other people's lives ruin them for life, and that won't happen to these guys. That won't happen, So I don't know, when I went to college, maybe I was really blind, but SAE was one of the few fraternities at the school I went to which was integrated and actually had Jewish members. And so I always, not that I ever really followed a lot about Greek life, but I always kind of thought of SAE with some, that they were
a bit more respect.
I guess they're not. I guess they're not. I guess it's a Southern antebellum fraternity, one of the oldest and one of the most, in most places, one of the most racist.
Well, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to talk a little bit about that. This is also the 40th anniversary of the busing protests in Boston. I spoke about this a little bit last week, and that because one of my questions is of course Selma happened before I was born, but I do remember some of the busing riots. I remember and certainly have friends who were there, who as 9 and 10-year-olds, and and there's a sense of like, hey, wait, where where is everybody who went, all the VUUs from New England who went down to Selma, and like where were they for the busing riots? And one of the things that that Scott Wells, who does the Boy in the Band's blog, he actually found something in Bob West's biography where where Bob actually sort of called on Unitarian Universalists to come to a big protest. People did. People came from all across the country to come and protest this. And yet I think it's also very different when it's in your backyard, and also sort of a sense of the folks who were Unitarian Universalists, as maybe many people who are Unitarian Universalists today don't go to South Boston. Even though it's a very different
it is,
than it was even just even 15, 20 years ago, but never mind 40 years ago. But that sense of like, but these people can figure out where I live, or all that sort of stuff. So there is still of this sense of like, these things are happening in my name, and certainly you hear it from sports athletes, certainly back then as well as today, sort of saying, I don't want to come to Boston. It's a racist city, and and leaving a lot of us kind of going like, what are you talking about? So it's certainly a very awareness.
I've been reading a book recently about the kind of the history of liberalism and the left through that post '68 and into the '70s, and just what an enormously difficult situation the Boston busing crisis was. That different organizations on the left went different ways on it. It was not a unified thing. It was, a whole strain appeared that was kind of that tried to take a a pro-working class stance that ended up being in collusion with, the anti-busing movement. It was a difficult time, time for people, and very, very confusing. And kind of part of the breakup of that liberal movement at that time was one of the key incidents. And I'm reading all that stuff, and I'm going, oh yeah, I remember that now. It's kind of gone down the memory hole.
Yeah.
So.
Common Ground was such an important book for me.
Common Ground. Okay.
Yeah, that's isn't that the book about busing, the seminal?
Oh.
I
have not heard of it. Okay.
Look at. I moved to Boston in '92 in a period of incredible transformation, moving into Jamaica Plain, and it was the beginning of the first of the serious gentrification that has just now we've had 20 years of that or 30 years of that in cities all across the country. But you know what? I want to take an opportunity since we're at the halfway point to go back for folks who were tuning in to talk about the ministerial search process. To go back to that if you want to go there, if you'd rather talk about busing, that's a really fascinating topic too. But because I appreciate that I'm on one side of this process as a second-year student at Meadville, and I'm talking to two folks who have been through it on the other side.
All the way past out of it.
Yeah, and even
have I been through it.
So we're sort of like beginning of career, mid-career, and end career represented across the. We have career position diversity, if no other diversity.
Yeah, even though we're all white guys, right?
Yeah, we're three white guys, which makes it unusual in our denomination too. I don't know. Anyways, for which I'm proud of VUUs. But I'd love to hear how the ministerial search process worked for you, and what maybe has changed over time in the process.
Well, when Tom first started, I believe they had the sorting hat. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Actually, they threw the candidate in the water, and if they floated to the surface, they got to stay in New England. And
if they sank,
they were hauled out and sent west.
They went to a fellowship. I know.
And by New England, we mean within 495. That's really let's be honest.
They were sent out to the west, Framingham.
Right. No, and of course, I think many of our viewers realize that that I also run a Facebook page called the Hot Stove Report, because I realized a number of years ago that the way our process is geared is very much like draft day in fantasy baseball. That there's this one day when everyone gets called, and to be honest, I originally started the Hot Stove Report where I would list churches and then the people who were listed who were invited to be their candidates, and I originally had just done it as a little gossipy thing among colleagues, and I invited 40 people, and now I've got 1,600. Including seminaries, including VUA people. Keith's on there.
I'm on there, yeah.
Right, and it's become and in part it's for colleagues to sort of see who's going to my old church, or who's where's this person who I knew in seminary, or all these sort of things. It's helping make us connecting us together, and also I think search committees have told me that. They were interested to see when people said no to them, where they ended up. So
it's a really healthy kind of transparency, not in a way to imply that people are trying to obscure it, but it just makes it very easy to see how especially as a guy who's new to it.
There was nothing before that. I mean, basically, you heard through rumor, or through gossip, or through you knew a friend of a friend. And then, months later, it would come out in the
UU world.
In the UU world, in this little column, of course. And at that point, I mean, that's just way too slow for today's, communication technology.
So tell me about your first settlements.
Me?
Both y'all.
Oh well,
tell us about the process first, Tom. Who was in the?
I'm really the most. when I went into, I was like probably in the last year of the
paper
process, and John Weston, and I have to admit, see, my whole process was skewed in the sense that the only church I was ever settled at wrote for my papers, and asked me to send them my packet, and then and so I think I had sent my packet to about one or two other churches, and had not not ever gotten a response from anybody. So all of a sudden, this church, invited me, and it was a church that I had, years before I had told Sue. I went to a conference in Worcester, and we left that conference, and we were driving around Massachusetts and looking at stuff, and I said, if I could have my dream come true, I would take a job as an associate minister there. They were not looking at that time, and then that's what happened. So I always felt very lucky in the sense that I had a very easy search. I never had a negotiated resignation, and I retired from the same church I started from. So I've been, protected in some way by my experience from, most of the horrible things that happened to my colleagues, and the anxiety-producing things that happened to my colleagues. So, I'm not the best voice, of that.
Well, I'm happy to talk about my project. I went into search in 98, 99. It was the last year of paper, and and like you filled it out. You filled out your own basic little description of who you are and what ministry you would bring. And like there's a green sheet of paper and a pink sheet of paper and a yellow sheet of paper, and one you kept and one went to 25 Beacon, and and then you'd meet with whoever was in the office, John Weston sort of say, I'd like my information sent to these people, and then they would then, contact you if they were interested, and then the exchange of packets, which were actual 3-ring binders.
Yeah.
And I remember, and actually my first settlement, I was up in Auburn, Maine, at the First Universalist Church up there as a 1-year interim, which was fantastic. And it's a fantastic church, a lovely church, healthy, so healthy they're able to deal with me in my first year, doing stuff,
Resilient. Let's call them resilient.
Yeah. But I remember getting my packet back from churches, and and I had it so that you could take out my sermons separately. I had a little, sometimes some people would just put everything under plastic, but I was like, no, and I'd get my sermons back, and they'd be like, someone had left their coffee cup down on it, so there was a ring on it, things were all beaten up, and then another time
read them.
They've read them, yeah. And then I got other people would send me like their church's packets. I remember like this one church sent it to me, and it was bladdered, someone had been standing on it, and it was like a mess, and I was like, really? You're sending this out to potential ministers? The pages were all ripped out of the 3-ring binder. They kind of put them back in wrong order and stuff, and I sort of wrote back to them, sort of saying, hi, you might want to do this differently. And then I remember once I sent a letter back to them I sent a packet out to a church, and they sent it back to me, and there was and in it was a form letter, and it said, dear Reverend, and then a blank, and then they wrote my name in, and then and not only was it just like that, like bad and rude, the sheet of paper had been Xeroxed so many times that it was really kind of spotty, and like the image had sort of shifted a bit on the page, so it didn't even line up straight, and, which of course, I sort of felt like, well, they're not calling me anyway, I'm gonna teach them a lesson. So I then make my own angry fake letter back to them. So it said, dear blank church / fellowship / society, then circled it, and rumbled it up a bit and sent it back, and
how'd that work?
I never heard from them again, which I think is fine. And I also remember another packet getting from a church, which came in this lovely wooden box. I mean, so like UPS would show up, and I opened the cardboard box, and there's this lovely wooden box, and in order to slide, you had to sort of slide the top off, right, of the box. You slide out, but you had to break a seal with an image of the church on it. I was like, whoa, check this out.
Wow.
Inside was this like lovely, like professionally bound little book that had all these other little sections in it, and it was amazing. And they had just finished a building campaign, or the first phase of a building campaign. So they had like it was a centerfold of like what we think our church will look like in the future when all this other, and it's fantastic and it's amazing. And they had like that fake straw stuff that you get in like bottles of wine when you order, like all this. I was like, wow, and
Wow.
And I was like, what? And then I looked through it, and I looked through it again, and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of writing here and a lot of images of the church buildings, but there's no pictures of people. The only person in the whole thing was someone's hand. It was a stock photo of someone's hands holding a dove, and I was like, okay, I think this says a lot about this church. Thank you very much, And very soon after that, John Weston went, okay, we're going to put this all online. And you put the search process online, and actually be able to ask more questions of both sets of folks, and which is really an amazing thing. It really is an amazing thing. And
the fact that you could go out and choose, choose where you wanted your paper to go and choose the churches. I mean, the longtime suspicion was, and I assume it's true, that somebody at 25, matched people up like a matchmaker, and if you were out of favor, your compensation would be in chickens, somewhere out in the Great Plains, I remember looking at, one of the things, my dad was a minister in the American Unitarian Association, and I went over to the library at Harvard, and I went through his official AUA file, and it was just like he had already died at that point, so I it was a little terrifying, because because my dad left the ministry when I was about 10 years old, and so I had no real adult understanding of what happened. So I get the file out, and they bring it to me. The lady with the white gloves, she brings you the file, she sets it down, and you're in a little room with a Xerox machine, so you can Xerox anything you want. And I'm holding the file, and I go, I could open this up, and there could be like some kind of horrible scandal in it that my parents never mentioned, like he had an affair with the secretary. I'm just like going, do I even want to look at this? And so on. But one of the things that was in it, it was all, nothing like that, right? And one of the things that was in it was my father had gone into search, and there was a church out. I won't mention it. I don't know why not. But anyway, one of the leaders of that church got in touch with one of the partners at Hale and Durr, which is a big Boston law firm, and because he knew the guy out in Kentucky was a chemistry professor, and he knew this guy from Harvard, and so he knew that this guy from Hale and Durr's sister went to a church that my father had been minister of, right? And so they're having this discussion about my father's skills and character, and at the end of it they go, since this is all off the record, make sure that this correspondence never ends up in the file, right? And of course I'm reading it like 40 years later, and I'm going, that was the way it worked. That was the way the search process worked back then. That was all, Harvard graduates from around the country, corresponding with each other and sharing second and third-hand impressions of ministerial, competence and skill and personality and character.
Talk about solidifying the class structure too.
Oh yeah.
If these back channel Harvard grads, no offense to Harvard, but
yeah, I know, yeah, but it was like that was the definition of the old boys network. I mean, because basically, people are getting back in touch with people in the same houses, Harvard houses that they knew to talk about that.
So, what would you? I mean, looking at the landscape now, I mean, like, what's a good first gig for a new minister?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think has really occurred in the last 15 to 20 years is that people are much more regionally limited. Where before, especially sort of early on in ministry, people were like, send me wherever I can get a job, and people, were willing to take smaller churches and that sort of thing.
Interesting.
And now people are kind of like, I need to be here or I need to be there,
Right.
and then
which then is spouse. It's the working spouse that drives that mostly. It's not people.
Yeah.
I really need a husband. That's one thing. That's apparent to me. It's like single income minister household thing.
It's an entirely unsustainable model. The only way I've made it was, through family oriented fellowship is what I call.
Yeah.
Well, you have a similar situation, Hank.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and so and also, with the more second career folks going into ministry in the last 15, 20, 25 years, you have that as well. People sort of saying like, oh, but my family's here, I want to be close.
Right.
And in some ways that can be great. In other ways that can be really limiting to churches that aren't in areas where there are lots of ministers, and so there's both pluses and minuses to that. I think it's also interesting. There's a lot more. I don't know if people are. There's a lot more churches in search. I think certainly early in my career, there weren't as many. There were more ministers in search than churches, and now it seems like it's starting to even out. And some of that is because of the retirement of baby boomers. Right. But of course there aren't as many Gen X ministers out there, and the millennial ministers are just coming into their own now. So I think there's also people kind of going like picking and choosing a bit more, kind of going like, last
year was a year, right? Last year there were more open pulpits than candidates, if I recall. Was that
wow?
I know here in Buffalo, the two major churches in Buffalo, downtown Buffalo, and then Amherst, which is the big suburb, are both in search this year. So that's like really all the major pulpits in Western New York, excluding Rochester. That's kind of incredible, But is that going to translate into better jobs? Is there like better opportunities for graduating or seeking?
One of the differences, and this is slightly related, one of the differences between when I came up and when and now, I think, is that when I first went into search, the difference between being a minister on staff, an associate or assistant or some other role in a larger church, I remember going to some of my senior colleagues, people who were older than me, and saying, should I take a position as an associate minister? And they would say, no, don't do that. That'll track you forever into a secondary role. And of course, your ultimate goal is always to be the sole minister at your own, as one of the guys said. You want your own shop, And I think that's really changed. I think a lot more people are interested in staff, multiple ministry situations, having other people to work with. You don't need to have that, you don't have your professional reputation doesn't suffer if you're the associate somewhere.
That's interesting to hear, because frankly that's kind of unappealing, is being the the chief cook and bottle washer at a family-sized church with program church aspirations, or what I saw at a church I belonged to for a long time was it was a small church with medium-sized church problems, which means small church resources, medium-sized church problems, and that's
the part that convinced me is I went out it was in Chicago, and we went down to a church that was way in the far south suburbs, and I, for some reason or other, and Ed Pira was the minister there, and I drive up to the church, and Ed Pira's on the roof spreading tar around on the roof, and he's 70-something years old, and he's basically trying to keep this kind of rickety old, kind of cheap 1960s construction building,
That's why at Meadville we now have a mandatory course in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning.
Yeah, totally.
Plumbing.
Jack of all trades, master of divinity.
And
you want to know which end of the plunger you put into the toilet.
My very first day in ministry, up there in Maine, they'd had Johanna Nichols had been the minister there, fantastic minister, and she left, and everyone was heartbroken. So I walked into her office. Or into the minister's office, and it was a mess. They, like, people out of grief hadn't cleaned it. So I was like, oh, all right, don't worry. And I said to the church administrator, I said, oh, where's the vacuum cleaner? And she went, oh, you shouldn't have to do that because the custodian will come in tomorrow. I said, no, it's fine, I don't mind. So she gave me the keys. I went down to the basement. I got the closet, unlocked the door, opened it, and water rushed over my shoes, and I was like, whoa! And there's just like all these pipes in this one room that were all burst and water spraying everywhere. So I go running back upstairs and like, how do I turn this off? And so get in the phone and they tell me, and then the custodian's like, right, go into the kitchen, move the big table, there's a trap door, pick it up, you'll see the nozzle, just turn it off. Great. So I do all that, go into the kitchen, it's this big steel table, pull it out of the way, got to use my fingernails to pull this trap door open, and I look into this pit in the floor, and it's just completely dark, and I'm on my hands and knees, and I'm reaching down into there, and I'm feeling around, finally find, like,
furry animal.
I'm afraid I'm going to be bitten by something, right? Find the shut-off valve, shut it off, and I pull my arm back out, and my hand looks like I'd stuck it into a cotton candy machine with all these cobwebs wrapped around it, and I remember just thinking, like, ministry, yes,
and the Lord's work.
Yeah, and I think that's, certainly when I was the settled minister in Medford, there's a lot of days like that. A lot of days I was getting dirty, crawling around, doing that sort of stuff, paintings, running painting crews, all that sort of stuff. And then being in other, in much larger congregations, where I didn't have to be the number one go-to person. It was good for me to know some of those things, but certainly, it is that, and I don't know if it's just because I'm kind of a guy, that I'm like, and that I sometimes kind of feel like, well, ministry is not the most macho of things, so I'll make sure the church is open on Sundays in the blizzard, and I'll make sure I'll help, get my hands dirty, putting the hooking the rope up to the bell, and all that sort of stuff. I don't know. It's me compensating for that,
Right.
How do you feel about, someone mentioned that they had an interim ministry as their first gig. How do you feel about doing that as a...
Great.
You said that.
Yeah. I mean, once again, like, you go in, you make these mistakes, you work out at least some of your initial bugs, and then you leave, and
before you get fired. You leave without being fired, which is...
You're pre-fired.
You're pre-fired. I mean, certainly, one of the things...
Sting off.
Right. One of the things I was going to talk about with Keith is that this year you have... there always had been sort of like community ministers and parish ministers, but now there's people doing developmental ministry, which is sort of a longer term interim, sort of like a 3 to 5 year interim to sort of say, you need to work on these 3 things, and I'm here specialized to work with you on these 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
And then contract a ministry, which is really sort of like going into sort of a half-time church, sort of saying, okay, this is what I can do, and and with a developmental ministry, you can eventually be called. Contract, maybe not. A lot of that seems to be more about the health of the congregation itself, and the size of the congregation. So,
I think, can I just say, I think
Sure.
that this notion that people get called for life, is just a fiction that we maintain. Because in fact, everybody knows that we're not called for life. We're called until either the church decides they want another minister, or we decide that we want another ministry. But we have this kind of like, collective delusion that we're all doing this for life, and which makes all the transitions really ugly and unofficial, and
yeah, it makes it seem like a failure because
it makes it seem like a failure. People have to come up with good reasons why they're getting rid of you. Yeah, I mean, it's just I mean, I'm always in favor of naming reality for what it is. So I think these contract and developmental ministries and other forms of interim ministry are going to become more the norm. I wouldn't mind it if we had, of course, who cares what I think? I do, so I'll give you my opinion. But that's the only thing I care about. But anyway,
yes, Tom.
That that I could see us all moving to like a 7-year contract and renewable.
Yeah.
But just to kind of clean it up and take some of the emotional overhead of ministry on the part of the congregation and on the part. I mean, you think about how I mean, this is something I don't like to think about, partly because my own father's experience. But you think about how much nerve it takes to decide that your minister needs to go, as a layperson. How much nerve it takes, and how much you have to kind of name the the elephant in the room and take all the emotional risk of all of that. Wouldn't it be better if okay, in 2 years we'll be up for a renewal and we can decide at that point in a more objective process that maybe this person has done all they're going to be able to do in this congregation, and it's time for.
And conversely, like, what a disincentive for spiritual risk taking. As a leader in your congregation, if you feel vulnerable and if you're in a congregation that you need to get out in front of where they are, and I've seen those congregations that really need a little love and push, but
this flip back to Selma just for a minute to kind of circle around.
Beautiful.
We got like 2 minutes left here.
Oh, you're good, man. You're good. Yeah.
I know. It's like a stand-up comedian. It goes back to the original joke. The Krista Taves, who's been doing this, vigil out at a shopping mall in West St. Louis County, she spoke to us very candidly about she's getting a certain amount of real serious pushback in her church, and it raises this ecclesiological point about, on the one hand, we want to meet our congregants where they are, and on the other hand, we want to keep pushing forward, and the unity of the congregations are very, very high value for us, and yet our congregations are not unified on some serious social issues. So right now, that's all coming in on her and her ministry, and not that they've chased her up a tree, but we have to be prepared to think through that question and not be just reflexively, well, the unity of the church and my career are the two highest values, and yet we're going to be a courageous, prophetic faith that confronts racism, which is the hot button of all. So there we are. So
Tom, I love what you said, just to jump in an earlier post about that your job as the minister is not to make sure everyone is heard or everyone's opinion in your congregation here is valued, but rather that you are there to lay out the Unitarian Universalist approach to an issue. And I'm not getting that exactly right, but it really resonated for me.
It's not it's not to be quoted. It's just to be kind of like helpful to people understand that we're not just group facilitators. We are religious leaders, and and in times that are difficult, that's difficult, and it's not going to always make people happy. But there we are.
Yeah.
You know, at least our job is to point out what's important. Right? You know, what's important. That, you know, I think that, you know, being reliably anti-racist is more important than keeping every member of the congregation happy.
Right. How many ministers are having that stupid all lives matter conversation?
I mean, I think that's a great thing. You know, it kind of like, because we have this, you know, universal. You know, I mean, we're built on universalism. You know, everybody. You know, that's part of the minimization approach that we take to all racial differences. That everybody's the same under the skin, and you know, all of this, and that's being challenged by events and by certainly by, you know, leading elements of the African American community, and you know, and so we're up against kind of like resorting what our theology actually means in this period of time. You know, I have a couple blog posts on that too. But you know, hey folks, it's 12 o'clock, over 12 o'clock. Thanks to Keith Cron for providing this wonderful insight into the search process, and to all our regulars who have.
In earnest, I was in contact with Keith, and he tried and tried and tried and tried.
I know he did.
And he was so tenacious, and so I do want to thank him for.
We'll bring him back. We've had him before, I'm sure. We'll bring him back because he's always insightful and interesting about this matter, which is so close to all of our hearts.
So let me say. So the Hot Stove Reports on Facebook, it's open to anybody. So you just go. You don't even need to join Facebook. You can just go and look and check out stuff. And yeah, good stuff. April 2nd, the first Thursday in April is sort of decision day. That's the day when churches have the opportunity to ask ministers to be their candidates. So at noon East Coast time, April 2nd. And
all right, we'll all be there.
I think next year it'll be April 1st. I think that works. That'll be as I drop my computer.
You're so excited you knocked your computer over.
Well, okay, everybody. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next week. What do we have for next week? Do we know?
We do. Let me just see you real fast. It's going to take a second.
It's about dentistry.
It's about HVAC. Hold on, it's coming. Next week we have Don Southworth. Talk about the VUU.
All right, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, folks. See ya.